Hello everyone, in today's lesson that we have, it's basically kind of a game show. So what kind of sentence is it? And we've done this before. This should all be kind of a review, but I want you to be able to clearly identify when you're looking at a sentence, when you're looking at it in a book, or when you're actually writing it yourself, that what kind of sentence are you using? As well as when you are speaking, you should be able to now, instead of just speaking in simple sentences, you should be able to speak in more longer and complicated sentences. And when you do that, you need to know the difference. Now, these are your basics that we have. We have statements, questions, commands, and exclamations. Now, you've already learned these, and these are your four basic kinds of sentences. And so, what is a statement? Well, a statement is just telling you something, and it ends with a period. Okay? Statements end in periods. If you have an exclamation, it's adding a little bit more emotion to your sentence, and that ends with an exclamation mark. But when you have a statement or an exclamation, the sentence pattern that we use, as you learn, basic sentences have nouns and verbs. You need to have a subject and a verb to make the shortest, simplest sentence. So like, I ran. You haven't gotten into transitive and intransitive verbs yet, but a lot of times you're going to also have sentences that are, of course, longer. So you'll have like, I ran to the store, or you could say, he is tired, right? And so in those cases, you can have more than just a subject and verb. You can have subject, verb, direct object, subject, verb, adjective, subject, verb, prepositional phrase. And so when you're using your statements, it's the order of it. Subject comes first. So it's the noun before the verb is the formation, is how you actually write a statement kind of sentence. But when you're asking a question, of course questions end with a question mark, but how do you start a question? Yeah? That was a question. So when you're using a question, questions could be two basic kinds. You could have a yes or no question. And so when you're asking a yes or no question, you could start with do, right? Like, do you want to go home? Yes, no. Do you want to study English? Yes, no. At the end, you're going to have your question mark as your punctuation, and you can start with do. You could also use past tense. Did you do something? What about the be verb? You can start with is, right? So, is he tired? That's asking a question, yes or no. Are they eating lunch? Yes or no. And so basically you're going to be using either do or the be verb, using subject-verb agreement, to ask a yes or no kind of question. If you want to ask a little bit more of a complicated question, you have to use your question words. The WWWHW. What? Who? What? When? Where? How? Why? So if you begin with these words, obviously you're going to be asking a question. So that's how you do a question. Starting with these kind of words. When you have a command, commands are different. Instead of starting with a subject noun before you get to the verb, commands usually begin with a verb before you have your subject noun or before you have any kind of noun. So instead of saying, like a statement, he is tired, right? For a command, you could say like, go, sleep, right? So what is go? My verb. What is sleep? It's a noun. Subject? No. Because when you have go sleep, what is your subject noun? Your subject noun, who am I talking to? That is my subject. So even though I don't say you go to sleep, I could just not say my subject, start with my verb, and that's my command. So go to sleep. I'm telling someone, and that someone is your understood you, and that is my subject. But for a command, you start with a verb before your noun. For an exclamation, like we said, it's just like a statement, just adding a little bit more emotion to it, and you are starting with your noun before your verb, here your subject noun. Although for a command, you could also use the exclamation, because you could say, go to sleep, or you could say, go to sleep! And in that case, I'm, again, adding more emotion. So that's why commands can be either a period or an exclamation mark. Exclamation marks or exclamations are always exclamation marks, and statements are always periods. Okay? So those are your simple ones, and you should already know this. And this semester, we also learned simple sentences, complex sentences, compound sentences. Now, simple sentences, I don't want you to be confused with a simple sentence and the simple verb tense, right? A simple sentence can use all of your different verb tenses that you have learned, either the simple tense, progressive tense, perfect progressive tense. You can use all of these and make a simple sentence. So what is a simple sentence? A simple sentence is using one independent clause. Now, we've learned about clauses. An independent clause is a complete thought, but it's not a sentence unless it has a capitalization at the beginning and a punctuation mark at the end. But that's still one complete thought and independent clause, okay? So in that case, a simple sentence is not the same as a simple verb tense, because I can have an independent clause, simple sentence, with using my progressive tense or my perfect tense, as we mentioned, okay? So a simple sentence is just one independent clause with the capitalization and a punctuation mark at the end. A complex sentence, as you've already learned, is either going to be an independent clause and a dependent clause, like so IC first, DC after, or you can have a dependent clause first and an independent clause after that. So when you have your two patterns, it's IC, DC, punctuation mark, or it's DC, comma, IC, punctuation mark. So that's how you make a complex sentence. How do you make a compound sentence? Compound sentences, you're using, instead of an IC and a DC, you're using two independent clauses, and to connect those together into one sentence, you need to have a comma and a conjunction. So you have independent clause, comma, conjunction, independent clause. You could actually do this without the comma and conjunction. Instead, you could do independent clause, semicolon, independent clause, and that makes a compound sentence. You've already learned these, so let's look at a couple of examples, and in those sentences, you should be able to tell me, is it a simple sentence, complex sentence, compound sentence? Is it a statement, question, command, or exclamation? So, let's look at some examples. Alright, so here on our board we actually have kind of definitions that go along with your example sentences, so I think this should hopefully make everything a little bit more clearer. Okay, so let's start with our first sentence. Simple ideas usually are shorter sentences. Simple ideas usually are shorter sentences. Tell me, is this a statement? Is it a question? Is it an exclamation? Is it a command? Think about it. Simple ideas usually are shorter sentences. Ends with a period, okay? Starting with your subject. Ideas are shorter sentences, okay? So when we use simple ideas, I'm describing what kind of ideas. So in this case though, it's a statement, right? I'm just telling you something. Next sentence. How do you express more complicated ideas? What does it end with? Question mark. So this is, of course, a question. It's a simple question. How do you express more complicated, more complex ideas? Question mark. Is it a yes or no question? No. I'm using one of the who, what, when, where, how, why, those 6 types of open-ended questions. Yes or no questions are different. There's only 2 answers. Open-ended, you could have many different kinds of answers. Next, what about this sentence? Use complex sentences for larger ideas. What kind of sentence is this? What's the ending? Exclamation mark. So is it an exclamation? Yeah, kind of, but really, what am I starting with? As we said, when we're using commands often begin with a verb, not a noun. So here, use complex sentences. I'm telling you to use them. What's my subject? You, or people, should use complex sentences, right, for larger ideas. Shorter ideas, simple ideas, you can use simple sentences. So we have, of course, our complex sentence and compound sentences. What about this one? Compound sentences can be difficult to master, but you will get better with more practice. What kind of sentence is this? It's a statement. Is it a simple sentence? No. Here we have two different clauses. Remember, this is an independent clause, this is an independent clause, this is an independent clause. So your first three, even though we have a statement, question, and command, these are still one clause sentences. But once you get here, compound sentences can be difficult. I could put a period, and this is done. Or you will get better with more practice. That could also be an independent clause. However, here, when I use the but, what am I doing? I'm putting your two independent clauses together. And that is a compound sentence. So compound sentences can be difficult, comma, conjunction, IC. So IC, comma, conjunction, IC. I could take this off and say compound sentences can be difficult, semicolon, you will get better with more practice. And that could also be a compound sentence. Our last example, when writing complex sentences, it is important to know when to use a comma correctly. So when you have a complex sentence, if you are starting with an independent clause and then ending with a dependent clause, do you need a comma? No. But here in this sentence, when writing complex sentences, I have a comma here because when is a dependent clause marker. When writing complex sentences, here, right, this is a dependent clause. So when writing complex sentences, it is important to know when to use a comma correctly. Here, this is my independent clause. So I have DC, comma, IC, period. Comma is only used in that order. So these are example sentences, but they're also definitions to help you understand the difference between what kind of sentence is it. All right, let's review. Not yet. Kind of. Now there was a small mistake on this board, and maybe you saw it, maybe you didn't, but it's right here actually, right? I just added this in. Remember, when you have a DC, a dependent clause, if you take out the dependent clause marker, when, you should still have a complete thought. But in this sentence, if I said, when writing complex sentences, if I take out the when, writing complex sentences is not an independent clause. What am I missing? Here I have writing complex sentences. This is a gerund phrase, right? Because writing is not being used as a verb here. Writing complex sentences, this idea of writing complex sentences, that's your noun. I'm missing a verb. But if I add you, so when you are writing complex sentences, now I have a dependent clause. Because take out the when, and what do I have? You are writing complex sentences. I could have that as a sentence by itself. Okay, so a little mistake here on the board, but maybe some of you caught it. I definitely did after I said let's review. So let's look at this again. Add this to your definitions, and this time for real, let's review. What kind of sentence is it? What are the four basic types of sentences? The four basic types of sentences are statements, questions, commands, and exclamations. What is the grammatical order of words for a statement or exclamation? The subject noun usually comes before the main verb in statements and exclamations. What is the grammatical order of words for questions? The main verb comes before the subject noun in questions. How do you start a yes or no question? You use the verb do or the verb be to begin a yes or no question. How do you start an open-ended question? You use who, what, when, where, how, or why before the verb, then it is followed by the subject noun. Who is the subject in a command? The subject in a command is the person or persons being told what to do. Commands usually start with an action verb followed by an object noun. What is the difference between a simple sentence and the simple verb tense? A simple sentence means that you are using one independent clause, which can use any of the 12 verb tenses. But there are only 3 simple verb tenses. What is a complex sentence? A complex sentence uses at least one independent clause and one dependent clause. What is a compound sentence? A compound sentence uses 2 independent clauses together connected by a conjunction.